I was sitting on the back porch of my new house the morning they showed up, drinking coffee I didn't have to share with anyone, watching the mist lift off Lake Champlain, 63 years old, finally free. I remember thinking, this is it. This is what you worked for, Arthur. Just you, the water, and the quiet. 20 minutes later, my sister's car pulled into the driveway. I should back up. My name is Arthur. I spent 31 years as a patent engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing firm in Burlington, Vermont. I was never flashy, never drove a new car, or wore a watch that cost more than $40. My sister Lorraine called me boring. Her husband Glenn called me worse. A man who peaked in high school and didn't know it yet. He said that at my mother's funeral, by the way, while I was still holding the program with her photograph on the front. That was 22 years ago. In those 22 years, Lorraine and Glenn built a life on appearances. A brick colonial in a subdivision with a gate that didn't actually lock. Glenn sold insurance, not well, based on what I heard, but he sold the image of selling it very well. They took vacations and photos, but flew economy. They hosted dinner parties and served wine they bought by the case at a discount club. I worked. That's all I did. I worked, and I thought, and I wrote things down. In 2019, I filed a patent for a microcompression valve system I'd been developing in my garage for 6 years. A quiet little mechanism. Nothing glamorous. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my neighbor Cecil, who knew about everything else in my life because we shared a fence and he talked constantly. In 2023, a manufacturing conglomerate out of Ohio acquired the patent for $9.4 million. I was 61 years old. I had no mortgage, no debt, no dependents. And now I had $9.4 million sitting in an account, looking at me like it expected instructions. I bought the house on the lake. I didn't tell Lorraine. I didn't tell Glenn. The only person who knew was my attorney, a quiet woman named Frances who had handled my affairs for 15 years and who responded to the number with 2 words. Well, good. I moved in October. The leaves were turning. I had 3 boxes of books, a cast iron skillet, and the best coffee maker I'd ever owned. I was happy in a way I hadn't been in decades. Not because of the money, that surprised me, actually. I was happy because no one knew where I was yet. That lasted 4 months. My nephew Dylan was the one who found me, I think. He's 20 now. Glenn and Lorraine's youngest. He'd always been different from his parents. Quieter, more observant. He'd shown up at my old apartment twice in the last few years. Once when his parents' marriage was falling apart the first time, and once when it was falling apart the second time. Both times I made him grilled cheese and let him talk and didn't offer advice unless he asked. I liked Dylan. I want to be clear about that. He wasn't part of what came next. Not knowingly. What I think happened is that Dylan mentioned the lake house to his mother in passing. Probably said Uncle Arthur seems happy, and didn't think about what that information would do in her hands. The car that pulled into my driveway that February morning was Glenn's Audi. He'd had it detailed recently. I could see the shine from the porch. Lorraine stepped out first, in a coat I didn't recognize, expensive looking. Glenn came around from the driver's side, and then the back door opened, and there was a young man I didn't immediately recognize. His name was Preston, Glenn's nephew from his first marriage's side. I had met him 3 times in 20 years. He was carrying a laptop bag. I stayed on the porch. I didn't go down the steps. I held my coffee cup, and I waited. The rain got halfway up the path before she started waving like we'd just been apart for a long weekend. There he is, she said. We've been trying to reach you. My number hasn't changed, I said. We wanted to see the new place. She was already looking past me at the house, at the windows, at the square footage she was calculating behind her smile. How did you find it? Dion mentioned the lake. Champlain isn't that big. She reached the porch and hugged me with the hug she used at funerals. Brief, positioned away from the body. It's beautiful, Arthur. You've done well. That word. Well, From the woman whose husband told me I'd peaked in high school. What do you need, Lorraine? She looked hurt. She was good at looking hurt. 30 years of practice. Can't a sister visit her brother? You can visit. I'm asking what you need. Glenn had reached the steps by then. He shook my hand with both of his, the way salespeople do. Arthur, this place is something else. What is this, 4 bedrooms, 5? What is Preston doing here? I asked. A pause. Just half a second. But I'd known Glenn for 30 years and I knew his pauses. Preston's in finance now, we thought. Since you're at a new chapter, you might want someone looking after your interests. Family rates. He smiled. Better than what some stranger charges. And there it was. Not even a full 10 minutes. I hadn't even a full 10 minutes. I hadn't even offered them coffee. I let them in. I want to explain that because a lot of people would ask why. The answer is, I needed to know how far they were planning to take it. You can't respond to something you don't fully understand. And I had learned, in 31 years of engineering, that you never make a decision about a system until you've watched it run. So I made coffee. I showed Lorraine the kitchen. I let Glenn walk the property like he was appraising it. I let Preston open his laptop and start talking about wealth management structures and estate planning concerns and the importance of having someone you trust at the table. I listened. I nodded at the right moments. I asked questions that sounded like interest but were actually inventory. What I learned in that 2-hour visit, Glenn's insurance business had 3 outstanding judgments against it. Lorraine had co-signed a business loan for a boutique fitness studio that had closed in 2022. Preston was not actually a licensed financial advisor. He had a certificate from an online program and a LinkedIn profile with a title he'd apparently given himself. And they wanted me to establish a family trust, with Preston as co-trustee, that would simplify the management of my estate. They wanted access to the money. That was the whole visit. I thanked him for coming. I said I'd think about the trust. I walked them to the car. Lorraine hugged me again at the door of the Audi and said, "We're family, Arthur. We just want to look out for you." Glenn gave me a card with Preston's contact information on it. Preston gave me a folder with a proposal inside that he'd clearly prepared before they arrived. They had planned this visit. They had researched it. The folder had been printed, bound, and tabbed. After the car left, I went back inside, sat down at the kitchen table, and called Frances. "They came," I said. "I expected they would," she said. "How bad?" "They brought a fake financial advisor and a pre-prepared proposal for a co-managed trust." A pause. "How long do you want to let this run?" "Long enough to document everything," I said. "I need to know if they've already taken steps or if they're still in the planning stage." "I'll make some calls," Frances said. "Don't sign anything." "I know. And Arthur, don't let them move in." They asked 2 weeks later. Lorraine called on a Sunday evening and worked up to it over 20 minutes of conversation about nothing. The weather, a cousin's wedding, a home improvement show she'd been watching. Then, "Arthur, Glenn and I have been talking. You have all that space up there and things have been a little tight down here since the studio closed. We thought just for a few months, while Glenn gets the business restructured." "No," I said. "Just hear me out." "I heard you out, Lorraine." "No." Silence. Then the shift. The voice she used when the soft approach hadn't worked. "After everything we've been through as a family, after I helped you when you were starting out, you let me borrow $200 in 1987, I said. I paid you back in 1988, with interest because you asked for it." She didn't have a response to that. "Is there something else?" I asked. "You've changed," she said. It was an accusation. "I have," I agreed. "Good night, Lorraine." What I didn't know at the time, what Frances uncovered over the following weeks, was that Glenn had already consulted a probate attorney about what would happen to my estate if I died without a will. He had done this in January, before they even visited, before they'd confirmed where I lived. He had started researching before he knew I'd bought a house on a lake. He'd started when word got out, through some professional network I'd never been part of, that a patent sale in Vermont had cleared 8 figures. Glenn had done the math. He'd figured out it was me, and he'd started planning. Francis also found out that Preston had approached 2 other people in the last year with the same co-trustee proposal. One of them had signed. That person was an elderly man in New Hampshire who was now in the process of trying to recover $60,000 from an account Preston had managed. I stopped being patient after that. I want to tell you about Dylan because he matters. He called me in March, not from his parents' house. From a parking lot, I could tell by the background noise. He sounded like he was trying to keep his voice down. "Uncle Arthur? I need to tell you something. Go ahead. Mom and Glenn have been talking about you every night for 2 months. Glenn's got paperwork, legal stuff. I saw it on the kitchen counter and I couldn't read all of it, but your name was on everything." "I know," I said. "You know?" "I've known for a while. Francis is handling it." He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't tell them where you lived to cause problems. I just said you seemed happy." "I'm sorry." "I know that too," I said. "You didn't do anything wrong." Is there anything I can do?" I thought about that. "Yes," I said. "I need you to be somewhere on April 12th. Can you do that?" April 12th was a Saturday. I'd spent 6 weeks working with Francis and a private investigator she recommended, a methodical man named Mr. Kowalski, who communicated exclusively by email and charged a flat rate that I did not negotiate down. What we had assembled by that point: documentation of Glenn's 3 business judgments, documentation of Lorraine's co-signed loan default, a full background report on Preston that included the New Hampshire situation, which had by then been reported to the State Attorney General's office, recordings of 2 phone calls, legally obtained in Vermont, which is a one-party consent state, in which Glenn discussed getting Arthur to sign before he gets suspicious with Preston, and the letter from the probate attorney Glenn had consulted, who had, upon learning the full picture, cooperated fully with Francis. I had invited 12 people to the lake house for a spring gathering. Old colleagues from the firm, 2 neighbors, Cecil from the old fence, who talked constantly but was fundamentally decent, my doctor, who I liked and who I'd asked to come early, and Dylan. I had also invited Lorraine and Glenn, told them I'd been thinking about the trust and wanted to discuss it with some people whose opinions I valued. Glenn responded within 4 minutes of receiving the text. Frances arrived at 10 in the morning with a colleague from her firm. They set up in the study. Mr. Kowalski emailed me at 10:15 to confirm that everything was organized and filed. The party started at noon. Glenn was in good spirits when they arrived. He was wearing a blazer. He brought a bottle of wine, a real one this time, I noticed, not the discount club kind. He was already working the room before his coat was off. Lorraine went straight to the kitchen, which was her way of assessing a house. Start with the appliances, work outward. Preston was not there. I had not invited Preston. I let the afternoon develop. I talked to Cecil. I talked to my old supervisor, a woman named Miriam who had been the sharpest person in the building for 30 years and who I had genuinely missed. I let Glenn circle the room, shaking hands, presenting himself. Around 3 o'clock, I asked everyone to come to the living room. I said I wanted to share something. Glenn found a seat near the front. He was smiling. He thought this was the trust announcement. I stood at the far end of the room, near the fireplace. I looked at my sister first. "Lorraine," I said, "I want to start by saying that I've never wanted anything from you except to be treated like I existed. That's all. Not money. Not praise. Just acknowledged." Her expression shifted. "Not much. Just enough." In January of this year, I said, Glenn consulted a probate attorney to determine what would happen to my estate if I died intestate. He did this before visiting this house, before confirming I had purchased it. He did this based on information he gathered through professional contacts who had heard about a patent sale. I looked at Glenn. Francis. Francis entered from the hallway and handed Glenn a document. He looked at it and the color left his face with a speed that would have been almost interesting under other circumstances. "This is a letter from that attorney," I said, "cooperating with my legal team's inquiry. It documents the questions Glenn asked and the answers he received. The attorney has also reported the consultation to the Vermont Bar's ethics office, as he believed the framing of the questions suggested intent to deceive a potential heir." I kept my voice even. "I'm not a potential heir. I'm a living person." But Glenn wanted to know what would happen if I stopped being one. The room was very quiet. "Preston," I continued, "was not a licensed financial advisor when Glenn introduced him to me as one. He is currently the subject of a complaint filed with the New Hampshire Attorney General's office regarding the mismanagement of an elderly man's estate. Francis has forwarded the same documentation to the Vermont AG's office. Preston is no longer involved in any capacity in my affairs, and if he contacts me again, Francis has instructions for what to do next." Glenn stood up. "Arthur, you're reading this all wrong. Sit down, Glenn." "He didn't sit down," Miriam said from the back. She'd been my supervisor for 11 years. Glenn sat down. "I'm not prosecuting you today," I said. "That's not what this is. What this is the end of any conversation about my finances, my estate, my health, or my property. You will not contact me about money. You will not contact me about trusts. You will not send Preston to contact me on your behalf." I paused. "If you need help, real help, call a lawyer, call a bank, call a credit counselor. But don't call me." I looked at Lorraine. "I'm not angry at you. I think you made your choice a long time ago when you married a man like Glenn and decided that made you better than the people around you. I think you've spent 20 years being afraid that you were wrong about that choice, and it made you unkind. I feel sorry for it, but I'm done participating in it." She opened her mouth. She closed it. "Dylan," I said. My nephew was standing near the door to the porch. He raised his hand slightly like a student. "Dylan is 20 years old," I told the room. "He called me in March to warn me about what his parents were planning. He drove 40 minutes to a parking lot to make that call, because he didn't want to make it from the house." I looked at him. "I've set aside a college fund. It's separate from my estate and has nothing to do with anyone else in this room. It's yours. Go to school. Study whatever you actually want to study." Dylan looked at the floor for a moment. Then he nodded. Glenn said, "You can't just—" "It's done," Francis said from the doorway. "The fund was established last week. It's Dylan's." Lorraine and Glenn left before the dinner I'd planned. She paused at the door and looked at me for a long moment. I could see her trying to find something to say that would land, that would reframe the afternoon, that would give her back some of the ground she'd lost. She didn't find it. Glenn walked to the car without speaking to me. He hadn't said a word since Miriam told him to sit down. The rest of the afternoon was good. Cecil talked too much. I didn't mind at all. Miriam stayed until 7. I sat with Dylan on the back porch after most people had left, and we watched the last light go off the water. "They're going to be furious," he said. "Yes, for a long time. Probably." He wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Was it worth it? I thought about the question seriously, the way he deserved. The part where I documented everything and protected myself. Yes, obviously. The part where I had to do it at all. I shook my head. I spent a lot of years wishing my sister was different. That's time I can't get back. He nodded slowly. "But today," I said. "Today was worth it." I want to say one more thing. For anyone reading this who has a Glenn in their family, someone who starts doing math about your life while you're still in it, someone who brings a folder with tabs. The money was never what protected me. Francis protected me. 22 years of keeping records protected me. The habit of paying attention protected me. The fact that I never signed anything I hadn't read protected me. People like Glenn count on you being too tired, or too lonely, or too eager for connection to read the fine print. They time their visits for when you're vulnerable. They bring wine and wear blazers and talk about family like it's a membership you owe dues on. You don't owe dues. Family is not a debt structure. I'm 63 years old. I drink my coffee on the back porch, and I watch the mist come off the lake in the morning, and I have exactly the life I built, without anyone's permission. And the trust, the real one, the one Francis drew up, has exactly one beneficiary. Dylan graduates in May. He's studying environmental engineering. He called to tell me, and I could hear him smiling through the phone. That was enough. That was more than enough. I've thought a lot about the word failure since all of this happened. Glenn used it about me once, standing in a funeral home while I was still holding my mother's program. Lorraine never said it out loud. She was smarter than that, but she communicated it in 100 smaller ways over 2 decades. The way she'd pause before answering when someone asked what her brother did. The way she'd redirect conversations about money. The way she'd look at my apartment like it confirmed something she'd already decided. What I understand now is that they needed me to be a failure. Not out of cruelty exactly, but out of arithmetic. If I was failing, their choices made sense. If I was building something real in my garage for 6 years while they were buying appearances on credit, the math stopped working in their favor. So they kept the story going. And I let them, because I was too busy working to argue about it. That's the first thing I'd say to anyone in a situation like mine. The people who dismiss you are often doing it defensively. It's not about you. It's about what you represent to the story they've told themselves. That doesn't make it less painful, but it means their opinion of your life was never actually about your life. The second thing is about documentation. I am not a dramatic person. I don't enjoy confrontation. What I did on April 12th was not something I planned because I wanted to humiliate anyone. I planned it because Glenn had already consulted an attorney about my estate while I was still alive, and Preston had already taken $60,000 from an elderly man in New Hampshire. And I needed witnesses. I needed people in that room. Not for theater. For record. There's a version of this story where I confront Glenn privately. He denies everything. I have no witnesses. And nothing changes. 30 years of engineering taught me that outcomes depend on how carefully you set up the conditions. You don't get the results you want by hoping the other person will be honest under pressure. You build the structure that makes dishonesty impossible to sustain. That's not revenge. That's just thinking clearly about cause and effect. The third thing, and this one is about Dylan, is that decency travels. I don't know exactly where he learned it. Not from his parents. Maybe from the grilled cheese sandwiches and the fact that I listened without an agenda. Maybe from nothing I did at all, and just something in him. But he drove to a parking lot and called me from his own conscience, without knowing what I already knew, without knowing it would lead anywhere. He just thought I should know. When I set up that college fund, people might think I was rewarding loyalty. I wasn't. I was recognizing a person who had already chosen, under real family pressure, to be decent. That choice deserved a future built on something solid. I'm 63 years old, and I drink my coffee on the back porch, and I watch the light come up over Lake Champlain. The mist does the same thing every morning. It lifts. Whatever was obscured becomes clear. I think that's what the last 20 years were, in the end. A long, slow lifting. The work was always there. The house was always going to be there. I just had to outlast the noise long enough to see it. Dylan graduates in May. That's the whole story, really.